Hello, and welcome back to the crew. And today we're talking about something I think most women know far too well, that blurry line, that fuzzy line that's between caring and carrying. So just think about that for a second. We want to help. We're fixers and nurturers and organizers and problem solvers. Oh, there we go. All of those things. But sometimes our helping hand could become a full on brace. Instead of helping, we're holding up. So today we're asking, how do we love and support people in our lives without taking on that extra load of carrying? Hi, Anne. Well, welcome aboard with me. Oh, you were deep in
What a
thought.
topic. Yeah, what a topic.
I know. I'm sorry about that. But, I think about these things and then, my God, we got to talk about that. And then that brings up another one and another one and another one. So I know that it's hard to say those words, carry and, or I'm sorry, caring and carrying. So the carrying, if you can maybe get some semantics out of the way here, what that means to you, and then what that looks like, and what those signs might be from your perspective when we're carrying somebody or something.
Yeah, the first thing that popped into my mind is I think there is a distinction there, and you can definitely help me with this one in carrying, right? Because I think of enabling. The first word that popped into my mind is
Mhm.
enabling, right? And oftentimes when we're carrying people, we're enabling them, and that can be very hard to see, especially if you're a parent. So,
Oh, sure.
um, Uh, yeah, we can get into the parenting thing, but enabling is something that, people do until it becomes obvious that they're really not helping that person. And the easiest thing to think of in those is where somebody has an addiction and you're enabling their addiction by, I don't know, giving them money or telling them they're okay when they're not okay, and those kinds of things, maybe. I don't know very much about this. I am absolutely no expert in it. Um, but yeah, enabling is not good for the other party, doesn't help them. And when we enable our kids, it doesn't help, or anybody, not just our kids. But when we also enable people in less obvious ways than addictions, we're not allowing them to grow. Um, and and it can be extremely difficult to watch somebody make those mistakes that you go, oh my God, we all learn the hard way is one of the things that I found out, which means I never listened to anybody. I had to do everything the hard way, which was doing it myself, and I can't blame other people doing the same. Um, so again, sometimes it's just, you know, loving somebody enough, caring enough to allow them to make those mistakes.
Is a pretty fine line sometimes, isn't it?
Oh, it's difficult. Yeah, as I say, especially I find with my children. I try not to do it with my friends. But the thing that we need to remember, I need to remember, is that when I'm carrying or enabling, I'm um, I'm being selfish. It's so that I'm not going to hurt, not so that they are going to learn their lessons and grow from those lessons.
How do you know we mentioned the fine line, but how do you know that you're being over responsible or carrying the load too much? I mean, it
Yeah.
might be different for everybody, but I don't know if you have an example or if you can.
Well, I was definitely once called over responsible. It totally shocked me. But but yeah, what's the line? Oftentimes for me, it's just, doing that inward, am I doing this for myself, just myself, because I'm feeling fragile and I don't want to cope with somebody else's stuff, right? So therefore, I'll try and brush it off or something. Um, oftentimes I think I learn by, again, the mistakes that I'm making. So if I'm being over responsible for somebody, they're going to keep making the same mistakes. So I have to look at, if I want to say to somebody, look, you're making the same mistake, I have to look at, where am I enabling them to make the same mistake? That's tough. That's actually really tough. A very good question. Not an
Yes, and
easy
doesn't it?
answer.
No, it isn't. But I think it goes back to the last session that we had on uh, kindness, where kind as opposed to um, the word nice, nice
Nice.
versus
People pleasing kind of nice,
yeah.
yes.
And it's getting a
Mhm.
little bit more of that kindness coming up, because then when you recognize that you might be carrying um, more than what is good for the other person, that's
Mm.
when you stop being kind. Because
Mm.
you know, I don't know, I think we all search on some of this stuff, and it, for me, it um the indicators kind of might come from the other person. And I'm just thinking back to an example where, yeah, I carried my husband. In my words, I carried him for a long time but it was what I was willing to do. And it's what I was happy to do because I was contributing at the same time. But there comes a point where, I didn't recognize it, where I might have been carrying way too much, which I didn't realize until one day he yelled at me and basically said, you know, mind your own business. Kind of like that. It was mind your own business. And
Mm.
so that was an indicator to me that I had maybe gone, and thank goodness that he said those words, because otherwise before that he was just always keeping it in. He probably had those feelings for a long time. But had
Mm.
he learned to, I'm not blaming him, but had he learned to express himself differently rather than holding it all in, then I might have had a clue sooner that I was doing more carrying than what was being appreciated.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good example of your husband being nice and not kind. He
Yes.
wasn't being kind in the relationship because honesty is what's best in relationships, I believe. Um, but he was being nice by not blurting out at you or saying something that he knew that you wouldn't understand. Actually, I think is where that comes from. Um, so that's a wonderful example of that. It's a very good example of what I would consider yourself being over responsible,
Yeah.
right? Taking on more or not realizing where you were obviously going over his boundaries, right? And gosh, I know we do that all the time. We certainly do that when we're bringing up kids, in my opinion. But it's part of, how we think we're supposed to do it. But getting back to the word carrying, and I've in my head at the moment anyway, I've split them into two things. There's enabling, which is basically doing too much for people in whatever way, whether it's just out supporting them verbally or giving them money or whatever it happens to be. And then there's what I would call actually carrying, and what pops into my mind is when people are looking after their old parents or those kinds of things. So looking after people with dementia of any description, and that is not enabling
Right.
because those people are in a different space and need a whole bunch of things. Um, the distinction there between the caring and the carrying is when we deplete our own resources for somebody else, and you can't actually. It's not sustainable, right? Because if you're completely depleting yourself, then eventually you're going to end up in a as worse or bad place than the person that you're caring for. So we always need to look after ourselves first. Um, and a lot of people don't know how to do that. And that brings up that other thing about the martyr syndrome, which quite a lot of people have in our in a Western culture. I can't speak for others at all. But it goes back to how many people will interpret their religious upbringing and their religious doctrine that it's our human kindness. So this gets back to this kind word. It's our human kindness to do as much as we can. And we were taught about caring and giving and being kind. We weren't taught about looking after ourselves and making sure we looked after ourselves first, unless we were actually taught those things as a palliative care nurse, for example, those kinds of things. So we weren't taught those things unless they were specific. So we tend to think that we're being good. So here it brings in another word, not nice or kind, but good. And that one has scuppered a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back to, yeah, it is it a female thing or a male? Like, is it a difference between males and females? This, the
Speaking
conversation
from
about,
my own example, the person that actually brought this up to me, that he was realizing that, you know, he had this martyr complex was many, many years ago. I'm talking about like 40 years ago, and that was a he. So that was a man. Um, so I wouldn't necessarily know. I don't think I don't want to be stereotypical on that one, although when we think of carers, there are male and female care. I'm talking about in care homes. You know, the ones we would designate carers. There are males and females. Um,
in relationships, in the
in
sense of,
in relationships, are the
yeah.
women more over responsible than the men? I obviously think so. Um, being an over responsible person myself, but the thing is, I can't see it from the other. I can't be in the other person's brain, right? So one of the things that often couples therapy brings out is that, you know, the other person is thinking exactly the same things that you're thinking, right? But you just can't see what the other person is doing, especially when they're talking when you're coming from different places and you have different love languages is one of the things, one of the tools that's used for that.
Yes, I think it definitely relates to um, how we communicate with each other as a couple or
Mm.
as friend couples. You know, even just in situations,
Yeah.
relationship building. And I don't know whether this is just a hallucination, but I know in my family that there tends to be a difference between us old guys and then our younger ones. I see the males, the younger ones, a little bit different. That they are, in a positive way, they are a little more in tune to communicating and keeping up the lines of communications than um, I'm just going to class myself as us old guys, where I know in my own situation, we never did know how to communicate. It was difficult especially for my husband to do that communication thing. He didn't, and didn't want to learn it. He looked at it as I don't know whether I never talked to him about it, but as sort of a sign of weakness, that you have to talk too much, all these things. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's because on the whole, although again, this is, it's just stereotypical bell curve everything. um, um, women process by talking, men process by doing.
Yeah.
And that's why we tend to want to talk about our feelings and men don't, and why often their love language is by doing things, actions of love. Whereas what women want to do is just talk it out. Right? So that's very different. When we can understand each other that way and tolerate each other that way too is another thing. Yes. So I've lost track of what your question was.
Um, well, it, it was just, kind of out there, kind of a fuzzy kind of question anyway. I think you might have answered it. for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
But I'm also thinking about bringing it back to the carry and carrying, and the carrying or enabling having a bit of a negative context there. And thinking about why do we do this? And I think you've covered that. It's kind of our part of our conditioning. Maybe it's part of our, if we use that word, religious background, which is partly it's conditioning. It's how we're brought up, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of guilt in there at times, and we think it's a form of love, and then it gets to be a habit. I know that for
Mhm.
me, that habit
True.
part, what
Hmm.
because I did it for so many years, and I never viewed it as negative, right?
Hmm.
So learning to recognize that you are even, and we talked real briefly about, how communication was important in the couples things, whether it's a male female couple or whether it's a friendship couple. I think it is important. Um, but that's not something necessarily that I think, this is a hallucination here, but people of our age, that we learned uh, from watching others do,
Yes.
right? And I think
Yes.
we've seen now that we might need to fix something or change something or
Hmm.
get better at. And so we're
Hmm.
willing and we have time now to look after those things, to put on our oxygen mask a little bit and figure this out for ourselves and then get better. That it might be a little tiny bit about um, the conditioning that us and our age group had. And maybe some of the younger age groups don't stress out about that as much. I don't know. I'm just thinking.
Mm. A couple of things ran through my head, but in terms of the younger generation, um, I'm an optimist, and I think things are getting better in terms of people are communicating better. Uh, I hope our baby boomer hippie generation has passed on some of the things that we seem to have forgotten, like universal love, peace not war, those types of things. And I certainly see it in some people. What is interesting to me is I have a son and a daughter in their 30s, and I watch them and their relationships, and there's both. There's
Mm.
both people of that generation who are understand the value of communication, and there are people in that generation who are absolutely no different from anybody 100 years ago. So I would say there's both. Yeah, there's still both. There's always going to be both. That's a human nature thing. Um, but I certainly see things are getting better. I have a granddaughter. She's now 12, and watching her grow up in the environment in which she grows up, obviously very different from the environment that I grew up in. Um, and regardless of how things are politically looking at the moment, my granddaughter is being brought up in abundance, and I was brought up in scarcity just
Yeah.
after the Second World War. That does things to the psyche. Um, so yeah, that whole love versus fear thing, because when you're brought up in scarcity, you come from fear, and that takes a whole lot of growth to learn through, a whole lot of learning to grow through. And that's why I think at this time of my life, and I'm just beginning to, go, okay, it's time for, that self-actualization thing. What do I do about that? I've got time to work on myself in a way that I didn't when I was, working and parent and then a single parent. And so now I have that. And I don't know if you want me to carry on here, but I had an epiphany, which was mind blowing to me on this caring versus carrying thing. And that is, I've never really considered myself to be an overgiving person. Um, However, it came about that I learnt, and other religions will certainly say that when you're at this time of life, you now have the opportunity to be in service. And that's what I realized is my role now, is to be in service. And when I realized that I want to be of use to people, and if I'm not useful to somebody, then okay, time to move on and be useful to somebody else. And when I thought about that, everything that not everything, obviously, but some of the things that I'd been learning over the past 25 years was to do the self-love thing, right? So look after yourself, number one, and all the rest of it. And I think what I learnt is that line between self-love and being in service. And the difference is very clearly when I'm coming from my heart. And my example of that is my mum, where I actually never wanted to be a woman because of my mum. And then, and that took a lot of working through, you know? How old was I? 48 or something before we actually worked that out, me and my mum. And after that, we had a much better relationship. I began to really know who she was. That it would have never been part of what I would have wanted to do in my life, which was to look after my mum in her older years when she felt she was ready to have somebody to look after her. And then when that time came, when she was 90, I thought, okay, yeah, my mum's beginning to, need looking after. She doesn't want to cook her own meals, blah, 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 blah. And so, are you going to go home, meaning back to the UK, to look after your mum? And I thought, yeah, that would be fine. I can do that without overcaring. That word, right? I can do it without overcaring. I'll just love my mum and do the best that I can do with what I can do, not getting uncomfortable. And the key to that is being able to just speak your truth. To say to my mum, Mum, that's an example of being a people pleaser and I don't like it. Mum, you're saying sorry too many times and that drives me around the bend. So the fact that I could just speak my mind and my mum listened just made all of that possible. Now, my mum didn't have dementia or anything. So, I mean, that obviously made a difference. I don't know whether I could look after anybody with dementia. Not at all. But it didn't happen. My mum died.
Well, and it comes back to that communication. Sorry.
Yes.
No,
you're absolutely right.
Blurting my thoughts.
Communication.
Here. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, that was obviously a very important time for you. And thank heavens that you had the time to, to do that, because then you get, I don't know what I'm searching for there, but it's just a good thing rather than your mom moving on. Yes, that's
it's
the
a
word.
gift. That's how it feels to me. We gave each other a gift. Yep. And the other key to not overgiving is accepting, receiving gifts. I was brought up to deny them. And it took a lot for me to be able to receive gifts and to give of my gifts and to recognize giving and receiving as just an ending circle.
So if we can come back to, and I love your example of caring for your mom, these are my words now, for many years before that point, you were carrying her because, she taught you all these things that now you're changing. So you did carry her by enabling her to do that, right? You just,
I never even thought of that.
You didn't communicate. Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's great. It's good.
Coming back to it. And so you had a chance to fix it. But so trying to noodle through how to care without carrying. So, I mean, obviously, it's a different example than you with your mom because, and thank heavens that she responded the way that she did. But how can we look if we wanted to move those strengths up to a place where we're using them differently? How do we care without carrying the load? Do we need some new habits, uh, new language for ourselves, some of that self talk, or maybe that means the communication outwardly as well, or a new way of thinking about it, a new mindset? What do you think? How can we care without carrying?
It's about getting in touch with our feelings. And how do we get in touch with our feelings? This is how I learned it anyway. Again, other people, different ways of knowing, different ways of being. I learned it by listening to my body. What is my body feeling? Is my body feeling uncomfortable, anxious, or at peace? And even although I might be talking about anxious things, am I feeling clear? This is hard. How do you feel clear? I'm not sure of that one, but it's a feeling of clarity. Sorry, I've got fuzz coming in here. So in those situations, am I feeling comfortable or uncomfortable? If I'm uncomfortable, I'm overgiving. If I'm comfortable, I'm in there. I'm present. I'm comfortable.
Is there a new habit like that's formed where you can automatically do something different? Like, I don't know what do you check in
Uh,
with yourself and say, how am
yeah,
I feeling?
yeah, absolutely. Check in with yourself. And that is a habit which takes practice to get to. Absolutely. At least it did with me. It's not something I was ever brought up with, checking in with myself. What does that mean? But yeah, absolutely. It's observing myself initially and then realizing that when I check in with myself, which means, going into my body and how am I feeling? Am I coming from my heart or am I coming from my head? Am I coming from love? Am I coming from fear? You can put all those things on it, but basically it gets down, how am I feeling? Comfortable or not comfortable? And to recognize, so the first thing is just to observe. Second thing is to feel. And then the thing after that is to then do something about it,
Well,
right? Is to,
that's where I was going to go.
yeah.
Okay,
So
then
what are
what?
you going to do with that? Okay, it's to recognize when you are uncomfortable because we go through our days and we've got these habits and all the rest of it. So it's to catch yourself whenever you can. And the more focus you put on that, you just focus on it. That's all. Just put it in so here's a trick. You put the intention, I call it in the back of my head. I have the intention of observing and being aware when I am not comfortable. And you put it in the back of your head and you trust that it's going to work. That's just a coping mechanism. But I find that it works because I've got a focus now. My brain is working on now, letting me know when I'm feeling uncomfortable. And then in that moment when you feel uncomfortable, then it's kind of, okay, why am I uncomfortable here? Is it because I'm overgiving? Is it because I'm enabling? Is it because of whatever? It doesn't matter. It applies to every single situation. But in this one, it applies to, oh yes, I'm carrying my mum again, for example. And I loved your example because I didn't even realize that's what I was doing all of those years. But I certainly was because I was feeling uncomfortable. And it had to get to the point where I burst into tears and couldn't go on anymore with my mum before I said, stop, I can't stand this.
Mhm.
And I had an example to give her of, Mum, this is your over-pleasing thing and it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, the language was finally there to
Yeah,
to
I
have the
finally got it.
discussion.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
While you were giving your example there, my head went to that book that helped me tremendously over the last year. Maybe it's not 2 years anymore, but that book called "Let Them" by Mel Robbins, and I devoured that book, and I come around to the bringing it back into context of here. So first of all, the book she labeled "Let Them," and so it kind of gave me the feeling initially of, well, I'm not gonna be a doormat, so I'm not gonna just let them. You can imagine, me well enough what was going on in my head. But I think that, and she did in the subtitles, the "let me" part. That's the important part. So when somebody out there, somebody in our world is doing something, well, you said it earlier today, we can't change them. We can only control, or we have control over how we react and, what we do. So her second part about the "let me." So in that book, she talks a bit about the let them part. So we get over that carrying that we do that bring us about some of these situations and problems, I guess, that they are. But delves into the "let me" part. And I've seen like I've recommended those learnings in that book and Mel Robbins' podcast even to many people. And it's funny that they stay stuck on the "let them" part, and they maybe it's their situation, maybe it's gone on a long time, and so they do. Okay, well, I'm just going to let them, and they take it as a walk away point, um, but don't get into enough, in my opinion, of the "let me" part, because obviously something needs to change inside of here. So I highly recommend. I mean, if people haven't read that book, go ahead and get it. And it doesn't take reading it once. You almost need to read it twice at least, and also supplement with some of her podcasts, because it's big stuff. It's big, heavy stuff to wade through that she drills down and makes into a simplified conversation. She's not a psychologist or anything. She, she isn't even necessarily a coach. She's just, applied some of these things to herself. But that book um, has the possibility to help a lot of people. So I highly recommend that. So that's my takeaway on how, suggesting to people ways of letting others carry their own load. And then how do we do that? And what does that mean for us in the future?
Yeah. Can I just apply that
Please do.
to my
Yeah.
example with my mum?
Yes.
Because you could say that me, as you said, I was carrying her all those years up until 2008, right? I was just letting her. But what that was doing was we were distancing. And so the "let me" part,
Yeah.
which I had to bring in,
Yeah.
was that little voice in me. So here's something for people who go, hang on a minute, I don't really know how to connect with my feelings. Another tool for that is that little voice. So if that little voice is going, yeah, mum, but, or hang on a minute, mum, the little voice that you don't say. So if there are all those little things that you're not saying, then you have to look at, okay, where am I not letting me? And the wonderful thing about my mum's story is when I let me and we could communicate, like she would listen, she cared enough to listen, I cared enough to make myself vulnerable. You see, so yeah, there we go.
So I love the chat, the conversation about carrying and caring, and that the two are not the same. We don't have to carry when we care. And it's also important that we can show up for people without losing ourselves in the process. And I think you highlighted that with your example of your mom. I think it's a very large example, very poignant example. So I want to bring this session. I hate to. I could go on for a long time. We all know I like to talk about this kind of stuff because it really is helpful, I think, and it opens up that head here to open up and think a little bit more about it so that we can drag our heart along and make it ourselves in this learning process of how to be better in all kinds of things in life. So I thank you for sharing your time with us this morning, and for opening the door in a personal way and letting us learn from you and from your examples. And for the people out there who want to explore more, I mean, there's lots of levels that can happen here. But initially, I do have a sailor's log reflection sheet, and it's called the Helper's Balance, because maybe maybe we don't have to change totally from being that helper dude, but maybe it's more about balance. So that reflection sheet, just a one pager, it's free. All you got to do is put your request down in the comments, and I'll send you a link or I'll send you the sheet. It's available to you to help. And until next time, I hope that everybody take care of not only others, but take care of yourself. Bye for now.